Okay, so, all right. So the game, I'm gonna jump right into it and just show you guys what the game is, and it's like what I have currently. I guess I don't really need to. I'll maximize it. Sure. The interface is different than what I'm used to. Where? Oh, they changed this to a drop down. Okay, look at that. I'm even still learning some things. Okay, so this is the game, right? Actually, you know what? I have two scenes here. I'll start in the title scene. Just as an example, I wanted to make a title scene just so people could like look at it and play around with it. So there's my game, Tic-Tac-Toe Extreme. You can click it, does the animation, it jumps right into the game scene. So the game is very simple. We have a player 1, a player 2. You click on any spot here, and whatever your symbol is, it's gonna write it there, right? So I'm sure everyone here knows how to play tic-tac-toe. So, oh, look at that, I have a bug. When you win, it's supposed to draw a line showing all the things that are connected. And I have different things happening, like the background will turn in the color of that player. And you'll see it, yeah, once we start a new game here, it'll go back. Like I mentioned before, I want to try to keep everything very modular for this project so we can easily play around with lots of things for the power-ups. And yeah, and you just keep going and playing until you're done, I suppose. Just keep track of a score. And just to show you guys a few things here, if I pause it, I can mess with lots of little things here. If we go into a data here, and I'll explain this a bit more a little later. I just wanted to show you guys right now. So there's like various variables that I have set up here, but we can actually change these. Hold on, let me actually just make this. There we go, in here. So I can actually change the color of the player, and which is the value here. And if I do that, it all does it in real time. Right, so I can make this player also green or yellow or whatever. Yeah, there's a few different things here that do different. I can change their symbol, right? Instead of X's, we can be like, let's do Y's instead. And by changing that, since these are X's, now nobody owns those, so they just turn whites. And that's like, basically, I created a nice little playground here for adding like weird power-ups. So we're gonna do like some crazy things, right? Yeah, so the whole idea of how I structured this project, and I think it's a good idea for anyone to do something like this, is to make things do like have it so that you spend as less time in code as you can, right? I'm a programmer. I love spending time in code, but for making a game, you want to really empower designers. At least that's my philosophy. That's how I like to go into it. So like, even though I can just go and change some code, it would be great if something in Unity itself I could just go to and just tweak it to be like, you know what, this player, instead of red, I want them to be this color and always this color, instead of having to find a script somewhere or something like that. There's like a bunch of player data stuff here, so I can just go in here and change it, right? And so that's really how I tried to set up this project. And I did also want to mention that I do have this framework folder here. So the way that I have everything set up here, I have my two scenes. I have a framework folder. This is actually like a framework that I have been working on myself as like my own personal Unity framework with a lot of like stuff that I've written, a lot of like helpful things. I actually trimmed it down. I took out a lot of stuff that this project doesn't need. Mostly because some of that stuff I'm still actively working on. But for this project, I have a few things. And actually, funny enough, if you go to the events discussion Discord channel, there's a talk in there, like the game architecture with scriptable objects. This actually it takes a lot from that GDC talk. So anyone who's familiar with the way that Shell Games operates, assuming that you guys still operate this way, you'll be familiar with some of the stuff I'll be doing here. So I have things that I call game events, and then we have variables. And the idea behind these is that you're going to create. So like if you know coding, right? You create an event. An event can trigger, and then anything could subscribe to that event, listen for it, and then do something, right? And you can do that all in code. But for this project, I wanted to do it using using an actual asset in here. And the reason for that is because it makes things really easy to test. It's going to make it really easy for us to add power-ups. And debugging is just, there's just a lot of various benefits for doing something like this. And like I said, that talk will actually can go into more detail about it. And if you guys have any questions about it, I can also speak more on that. But we'll have those game events, and we'll have variables. Now, of course, in Unity, you can have the inspector over here. Anytime you make a script and you make a variable public, you can actually just change it in here, right? So the question could be like, why would you want to make a specialized asset for something like a player color, right? Where is it? I went to the wrong spot. When you could just expose it through a script. And the reason for that is that for something like a power-up, right? If we want to do something to the player, if it's on a script, you'd have to find that player in the scene somehow, and then you'd have to modify the data like that. But it's much easier if you could just link to an asset in the project, and then you can just change that, and that can occur in any scene. It could happen anywhere. It's just very simple. You don't have that you could technically even do it whether or not a player exists in the scene. You can still reference that asset, and it still works just fine. So hopefully that all made sense. But yeah, so that's the idea here. And I'll show a little bit about how they work. So, one other thing I wanted to mention too is that for game events, I actually have a custom icon here, and you can, which is a nice little thing you can do in Unity, right? If you have a script, you can just go here and just select an icon for something, and then boom, now all of those look like that. It's just a nice little touch, So, all right, so we'll look at game events, right? I'm not going to go through a bunch of stuff here. I'm just going to do more high level. So we have our class, the game event, and it derives off of scriptable object. So if you're not too familiar with Unity, basically anything that you have, like any script that you write that you want to attach to a game object, derives from something called a mono behavior. And a scriptable object is very similar to a mono behavior. If we actually look at them, they both derive from, I guess if it'll let me, yes, this goes from behavior. If I go deep enough, I think maybe components, I don't know, there's at some point, eventually they derive from the same class. It might actually be objects. But the difference is that mono behaviors, their scripts you're going to be attaching to objects, whereas scriptable objects are going to be actual assets in the project that you can create, and they are around forever, right? So when you do something with a mono behavior during runtime, you lose that whatever setting you just did as soon as you stop running the game. That's just how Unity works, which has a lot of benefits, of course. You can play around with things, and you don't always want to leave things in a broken state just because you were messing around with things while you were running the game, right? But there's also the downsides of you're going to lose that. But if it's an asset, you'll actually be able to keep any changes that you do even while you're running the game, right? And so I just showed an example of that before, like the color, right? We changed the color. If I stop running here, actually, I guess this is a bad example because the way I set these variables up is they have a base value and then the actual active value. I made it so you can change the value during runtime without actually changing what's saved onto the asset itself. And the value actually hides when you're not running. And I'll talk a bit more later about how I have that set up because I wanted to touch upon property drawers because they're a great way for customizing Unity. But yeah, so while I'm running, I can change the base value to like a different color. I can make this blue, right? And it didn't actually change the value, but as soon as I stop, it kept blue. Run it again, and boom, now it's blue. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with scriptable objects. And like a big thing that I really want to get across with all of this is like, just thinking about what you can do with all this stuff, right? With scriptable objects, with property drawers, with just a lot of different ideas, like the different types of games and architectures that you can make. Okay, so that's my rundown of the project. And okay, so does anyone have any questions about anything? I gotta remember to take a drink of water every so often. Yeah, there you go. So Dan has a more formal definition for what a mono behavior and a scriptable object would be. Okay. No questions about Unity for those of you who don't really know too much. Is that you following everything okay? Okay, so now we have an idea of what the project is, how it was built. Now I'm going to go over what we're actually going to be doing. So what we're going to do is, wow, let me actually make this maximized. While we're playing here, we're going to make it so that players, when they click, so they start a new game, and we have all these blocks here, and certain blocks are going to be tagged with a power-up. So if you flip that block, you're then going to get that power-up. And we'll have a little button underneath the players so they can click on that and then use a power-up during their turn, of course. Only during there's turn. So there's only the restrictions we're going to have. We're going to make it so that you can find a power-up behind a block. Whether or not you have a power-up already, it's going to overwrite that, just to keep things simple. But we'll also allow players to keep their power-ups between games. So we can have a fun little strategy there where people might want to be like, oh, this power-up isn't helpful to me right now, so I can save it for later, and maybe I'll still have it next game, blah, 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 whatever, right? So that's just the high overview of what we're doing. So doing all that, we're going to be doing things in code as we set up all the scripts for this. We're going to be doing things in Unity to tie everything together and set all that up. And we're going to do some Unity UI stuff to add the button in there. Yeah, so that's just a high overview. And yeah, that covers the idea of all that. Yeah, so I have an idea of a few power-ups that I'm going to put in here. And then, like I mentioned, if anyone has any ideas, feel free to pitch them. And then if we have time, we can maybe add those in there. Let's make it something crazy. A crazy fun game of tic-tac-toe. Okay, so to get started, the very first thing that we want to do is, and this is how I normally would approach something like this, right? So we have this game, we want to do this. There's several different things that we need to do, but let's just start off creating the script for it. So we'll go into, not the framework, the core folder, which has all the game stuff in it. And then the way I usually set up my folder structure here is I'll have a folder that has like all of the scripts together, because I once did a project where all the scripts that went alongside a specific object was also with that object, but I just find that to be very messy, so I like to have everything separate, right? All the code here, all the Unity stuff up here, all the UI here, such and such, right? That's just like, yeah, guys, that's like my own personal preference for that. So let's create a folder here. We'll just call it power-ups. And we're going to create a new script. So C# script, and we will just call this let's call it game power-up. All right. And let's open that sucker up. Okay, so I actually have my own custom. If you're using Unity and you create a new script, you might notice this looks a little bit different. In Unity you can change what the default script is, and I changed it to have like these regions because I like to use regions in my code. And the namespace here, you might notice, doesn't get filled in by default unless you set up a namespace in the project. I like to use namespaces, so I have that set up like that. But yeah, if you guys want to know more about that, then I could mention it. But let's get rid of that stuff because we don't need it. All right, so first off, we want this to be a scriptable object, right? So we're gonna make it that. Technically, I'm on a behavior, so let's change that. So what does a power-up have to do? A power-up needs to be able to execute. And first of all, let's also make this an abstract class. So if you're not too familiar with C#, an abstract class is just a class that you have to, it's a base class. You have to derive from it, right? You can't create an instance of an abstract class. And you can also make abstract methods and properties and such like that. So as of right now, the only thing I know this power-up needs to do is it just needs to execute and do something, right? So we'll create a new method and we'll just call it executes. Nice and simple. So any child class that derives from this will implement this execute method and it'll do whatever the power-up is supposed to do. And I always like to, do proper comments and all this stuff. I actually have a Visual Studio plugin that lets me just easily add in like, I guess, what do you call this? I can't even remember, like a summary, I guess, of different things. But I'm not gonna, usually I would do that, but for this, I'm not going to, just to keep things quicker. I don't want to document everything in the code. Okay, so boom, we have our power up, right? Let's make our first power up. So my idea for initial power-ups would be the most straightforward thing would be doing something with the score, right? So maybe you have a power-up and you want to click on it and you get a score, or maybe the opponent loses a point or something like that, right? So now this is, as a programmer, your initial thought might be to just make a script that does directly that, right? It's specific to the score, and it's gonna just take the score and up it by 1 or decrement it by 1. But that's not what I'm gonna do here, because I think a good way of approaching all of this, since we're approaching all this with the mind frame of empowering designers, right? We're going to make something a bit more generic. So we'll just make a generic power-up script that will change anything on in their player data, right? So it could change the score, it could change their color, it could change their symbol. It could be for the current player, it could be the player that's not currently going. So, and so down the line, right, maybe someday someone could be like, oh, I wish we could do this. And if you had something that targeted just the score, then, you'd probably have to go in there and change that or add another power up or something like that. So, generally, I like to try to keep things a bit more generic when possible, right? That way it's more useful and you can have more fun with it. So we'll call this one, so we're going to be changing player data. So we'll call it change player data power up. Kind of a big name, but it works. All right, so we're going to derive well, first of all, I put the other in the game namespace, so this also needs to be in that namespace, or at least reference it, but we will do a game power up as the class it's based off of. All right, so since we're going off of game power up, we now have an error here. And if I actually save this and go back to Unity, if we go to the console, you can see it's going to complain about some stuff. And that's because, like I mentioned before, the power-up is labeled abstract, so you can't create any instances of it. But I also made this method abstract, meaning it has no definition by default. So any child class needs to give it a definition. So we'll just call this the game power-up overrides, and we will give a definition to that execute class. All right. By default, Visual Studio throws in like this not implemented thing, but we can just get rid of that. Okay, so change player data. What do we need to know for this? Okay, so this would be a good time to mention something else I have in the project. So in the core and then the game, and then I have this data folder, which I mentioned has game events in it, and it has player data. But I didn't mention that it also has this global game data object that I made before. And what this does is it first of all, it references all of the player data in the project. And that's nice because, say, in the future, we wanted to make this 3 players. I could just add a 3rd player thing here. And then in theory, as long as everything else is coded properly, it'll just work, right? So there you go. There's a task for you guys if you want to play around with this. Add a 3rd player to tic-tac-toe. Good luck. But also the global game data. So here's a script for it. So it is a scriptable object, of course, because we can create it. So scriptable objects can have data that they have just sitting there, right? Pointed to other objects, pointed to, they can have different settings in here, whatever. In addition to that, they can actually house functions, and just like any mono behavior or anything else, any game object, they can also just have data that's only there during runtime. So what I did with this is I have a property here. So if you're not familiar with C#, you have your variables, right? And anytime you have a variable, it is basically, I guess, technically you have to serialize it. Since this is private, it's not being serialized, so it's not being remembered. But okay, so we have our serialized fields here. This is the stuff that we actually maintain that you can see in here. But then we also have this property, which is the current player. So this is just going to let anything know in the project right now who the current player is, right? And I set up game events. So whenever a player starts a turn, it's going to trigger. When a player ends their turn, it's going to trigger a game event. So anything can even know when a player starts or begins. So the idea here is that normally you would have some functionality like this in a game manager, right? That's like that holds all of this and knows it, and then things can like reference it. They can grab it from within the scene and ask it like, oh, who's the current player? But I wanted to avoid that because we're going, like I said, of course, we're trying to keep everything modular. We're trying to keep it so that things aren't doing hard references to each other. This power-up, for example, doesn't really care about anything else that the game manager has to say. It only wants to know who the current player is. And it can easily get that by referencing this global game data. Okay, so hopefully all that made sense. And I guess since we're here, I will also mention a few other things here for those of you who aren't too familiar about how Unity works. Because I briefly mentioned it, the serialized field here. So like I said before, normally anything that's like public, you can, if you have a public value, it's going to be serialized by Unity and exposed in the inspector, right? And you can set it. And serialization is just the manner of taking data and like creating like an actual like file out of it, pretty much. Where's the code? So the way that I like to set things up is, safe coding practices. Anything that you don't want to be exposed to the outside, you should have as private, right? But being that Unity normally only serializes public things, you might not want to let people like expose like the player data, for example, as public, because then some other class can go in there and just mess with the player data, but you don't want that. So what you can do is make it private, and then if you tag it with the serialized field attributes, so that you see these attributes all over the place in because I use them all over the place, and I have lots of my own that I've written that we will even see examples of later. But yeah, if you tag it with this, then it tells Unity, hey, actually save this data and let it be exposed in the editor, because it's actually like, serializing it. That keeps it from other code messing with things when you don't want it to. Right? Okay, so let's go back to our power up. So we're gonna do what I just did over there. We're gonna do private global game data, right? So we're gonna make a reference to the game data, that way, because we have to know who the current player is, right? That if we want to mess with their data. So let's see, what else is this gonna do? So we need to know the current players. So first of all, I guess we'll give whoever's creating this asset, we'll give them the choice of being like, oh, do you want to target the current player or all other players? So there's various ways that you can do this, but probably the simplest and most direct is just using enumeration. So we'll create an enumeration and call it target player, and we'll do current, and we'll just do others. Let's do that. Right, so, and then we will set up a new field here, serialized field, private, target player, targets player. Okay, and we'll give it a default value of the current. So we need to do that, and one other thing we need to do for this class, because we want to change player data, but we want to know what player data we're changing. So right now, the player data that we have is the color, the score, and then the symbol. Now, because there's actually duplicates of these, like there's two player colors, right? I can't just point to a player color asset. I can't just point to one of these assets and be like, oh, change that, because that might not belong to the player that we actually want to be targeting. So there's the way I actually have this set up is a little odd to have like three like permanent assets here and then one that like houses points to all of those. I wouldn't necessarily recommend setting up a project like this. It's just how I did it for more demonstration purposes. But to be able to pick which one of these we want to target, we'll just create another enumeration, right? We'll do target data. So we have the player's score. We could change the their color, and we could change their symbol as the other one. So actually, let's just copy that, and we want target data. More often than not, it'd probably just be the score, but okay. So now we have all that. I'm going to organize this a little bit, because Unity has a default attribute that you can add in called a header, just to make things look a little nicer. I like to divide things up to be like, okay, well, this is all the project assets that you're going to be referencing are right here. And then everything down here will be settings, right? Okay, so a few more things that we have to do. So if we're changing the score, the color, or the symbol, we want to know how we're changing that. And I think just the most direct way to do this would be to have three variables that whoever is configuring this can set, right? So we'll have an integer, which would be the score. We'll call it score adjust, because we're not going to set a score. We will adjust the score. And another one will have a color. For color, you could multiply it, or you could like add to it, whatever. But for this, let's just make it so like we'll just set it to a color. So target color. I'll default that to white. There we go, to give it a default. I think if you don't give it a default, it defaults to like a black with no alpha, and it's just not the greatest. Oh, look at that. Visual Studio, this autocomplete stuff is pretty great. It actually knew what we were going to do. Target simple. Okay, and we have to serialize all this. So, but that needs to be a string. Not. There we go. Okay, so the execution. We are going to first figure out. So technically, although this game is normally only 2 players, because I have everything set up very loose, there could be more players. So let's just assume the possibility of multiple players, right? So because of that, we need to first determine the players that we're going to be targeting. So I'm just going to do a list of player data. So player data is the that base asset thing here that I have here that houses everything else. Right, it says the number the player is, and it points to the other data about the player. And that gets passed around a lot in this project to reference a player. And it's really nice because then it gives a player an actual like asset you can point to really represent that player, instead of like something that's a bit more abstract or an object that can just be deleted in a scene, right? But anyways, we'll have, we'll just call it players, right? Okay, so we're going to look and see the player that we're targeting. So if target player equals the current, we're going to add the current player. And to get the current player, again, we can just look at the game data assets. Game data.current player. Actually, let's do a quick check here. Technically, it might not have a current player because current player isn't serialized, right? Which is good because we don't want it to remember the current player between like when you're running the game. But it does mean that if something hasn't set this yet, which by default something does not set it, it could be null. So let's make sure that it exists. If this is not null, we will add it. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to iterate all the players. So we'll just do for each player, and players data is the collection of all the different players. And if that player does not equal the current player, we'll add them. Okay, so we have our list of players that we're going to target. We're going to do whatever we want to. So now let's see what we're doing. I'll use a switch statement here instead of an if statements. So you can do if statements or you can do switch statements for, you know, I'm really, you can do a switch statement for any other case. It's more of a visual thing, I would say. Like there are some like performance things to consider, but for something like this, we don't really care about performance. Usually, if there's more than 2 enumerations, I like to do switch just because visually, I like the way that it looks more. So we're going after the target data. We have our 3 cases, which is the score. We'll put a break. We have the color, put a break, and we have the symbol. All right. So if we're changing the score, we're going to go through each of these players for each player in players. Technically, we're going to iterate this for all of these, right? So let's just paste it all in there. And we're going to change the score. And as I mentioned before, we're going to do an adjustment to the score. So so just to mention it, well, I guess here, I'll show you guys. So if we actually look at this player, it, like I said, it references a few different things here. It references the color, the score, symbol. So these variable assets, the way I have them set up, if we look at it, actually we have to go to the int. We'll go, so this is an integer variable. I'm not going to go over this too much. If you guys wanted to like look at the project and you can learn a bit more about the stuff yourselves, I'd say go for it. But a downside of doing this is you can't just like do something you could with a normal integer, right? So with a normal integer, you can do like plus equals 1. Now, technically, you could set up the code to support something like this, but I don't have something like that. So what you have to do is reference it and then do set value. And since we're adjusting it, we'll have to get the value to know what the current one is, and then add the score adjust. There we go. So that'll set to whatever we now want to adjust it by. The color and symbol a little bit easier because we can actually just say color, set value, and I think we call it target color. Yeah, there we go. And same thing down here, player dot symbol, set value, and target symbol. There we go. All right, we're all done. Well, one more thing. So we have all this set up, right? Now, how do we create this scriptable object in the project? Right, so I have all these ones right here that I've already made, and I set them to be in a custom folder here where I can just create them. So create, custom, and then here they all are, right? So we have the color variable, float variable, and all that other stuff that I've mentioned. But the the thing that we just made is not in here. So we're gonna have to put it in there. Unity actually has an easy way of doing this, but I also have, if we look at our game event here, you can see I have a class here, well, a method that actually puts it in there manually, and then I use this custom class that I have for creating the asset. Yeah, it's a small project, so it's pretty quick. There's like nothing really in here. So yeah, this is my own custom code for creating assets, and it's nice because it lets me have a little bit more control over it. But for something like this, we don't need to use that. So if you guys were setting up something like this, you can actually just go to the class itself, and I believe, what is it called? It is called creates asset menu. That's it. So when you reference this, so this is just an attribute that you tag on there. If we look at it, it has a few different properties. So it doesn't actually have a constructor where you can like specify 1 or 2 of these or anything. You have to actually manually like fill in the properties yourself, which that can be pretty common for some attributes. So for this, we want to set just the menu name. And I believe by default, although if we look at mine here, I defined the whole path here. I'm pretty sure it only cares about anything after creates. So we will do custom / power-ups. All right, we'll put it in there. And we'll give it a file name too, because I think by default it makes it like a one that I'm just not a big fan of. So we'll just call it the same exact class. Same thing. All right. So in our data folder, we're going to create a new folder in here, and for our power-ups to actually put them in there. We'll go in there, create custom, and it should be there now. Power-ups. Oh no, right. You have to give it a name. So this is the entire thing. I was just thinking that was going to fill it in automatically, but it doesn't do that. So there we go. Yes, you don't have to click on power-up and then create that. It should be underneath it. So, all right, create custom power-ups, and there it is. We'll click on it. Boom, we get our assets. Okay. Let's just say this one will be +1 score power-up. Give the current player a +1 score. That's the idea behind this. I'm actually going to change this. So in the bottom right here, you can change, how zoomed in. Normally, I would work like more of a list view approach, but actually, to make sure you guys see it a bit better, I'll just make it bigger. I don't know if it applies to the text too much. It looks like it's about the same size. I'll just do this. You guys can read that, right? I'm hoping you can. Well, if we click on it, cool. So we need to reference our game data. So I can just click on this and then, pick it from the project because it's the only one that exists in the entire project. So Unity's picker knows, like, it'll show, everything of the type that you've specified. That's a simple way of doing it. Something I like to do that I've been doing all throughout this project, and it's maybe not useful in this case, not terribly useful, but something that's really nice that Unity lets you do is if we... let's create a new region here. Scriptable objects overrides, since that's what we're doing here. All right, Unity has a built-in method called reset that you can make use of. So we'll see private void reset, right? And it actually popped in. You can see it's blue because it's like all the other methods that you might be familiar with if you use Unity, like there's awake, start, all that good stuff. Reset executes, actually right here, it even says if you hide it. So it's used when the player resets it or when the component is added for the first time. If what it means for scriptable objects is when you first create it, it's going to run this. So something you could do that is just helpful, you could actually automatically set this to something in the project by default, right? So we could say, oh, when this gets added, let's just fill this in. That way they don't have to do it manually. Now, in this case, it's very easy to do that. But for something like, if you look at, let's look at my game manager here. So we have like a bunch of like game events. Now this could get pretty big as the game goes on. We could have a ton of game events in here, and it'd be really nice if we could just automatically set them. That way, that way whoever's in the editor doesn't have to go through and set it all one at a time, or forget to set it, because forgetting to set things can cause all kinds of problems. So I believe, what is it, like assets? I actually have my own method for doing this, so we'll use that. It's in my framework. But it's in my framework in code that I have locked to only being used within the editor. Because a lot of the time, just safe coding practices, really. When you're doing stuff with assets, you're looking around, it's really slow. The code is really slow. I don't want anyone doing that when you're not actually doing editor related things. So the way the code is set up, it's wrapped in a preprocessor. So if you're not familiar with Unity, you have what's called preprocessors, and essentially so in this case, we'll do this. I'll just show you because it's a lot easier that way. All right, so we have an if statement. So the way this works is if this is true, in this case, we're checking a variable that's built into Unity called Unity Editor, then this code will be compiled. If it's false, this code will not be compiled, meaning if we do an actual build of this game, this code won't be included in there. So that's a way that that you can lock things in so that you can be like, oh, we only want this to exist in the editor. So and this is in utility editor. All right, and since we're referencing something that is locked in the editor, we have to put it around this as well. Now, technically, I don't have to do this. I don't have to put this here, this if editor. But if, like I said, if I would go to actually build the game, it would throw an error because this wouldn't be found, and it would be like, oh, you're doing things that don't exist, right? Anyways, okay, so I believe so it's called editor utility. This is the code that I wrote. We will do get scriptable object assets. And it's going to be the global game data. Okay, there we go. So now if I go back to here, I could delete this and recreate it, or I can reset it in the inspector. Anytime you have anything in the inspector, you can always right click on it and reset it. So we'll do that. There we go. Right, it automatically filled in. So now if I create another one, the same thing will happen. Now, like I said, in this particular case, it wouldn't be hard to set this, but I really wanted to show that just as like, that's something that you can do in Unity, right? You can be like, you can make things really easy for designers so they don't slip up, don't forget things. And yeah, and actually here's another example of this. So we want this to be a +1 to the score, right? So +1 to score. But so yeah, actually this is right. Target player, score, that's exactly what we want. But we're still seeing this target color here, which we're not using, and this target symbol, which again, we're also not using. So wouldn't it be nice if we could just hide those? And if they wanted a color, they would see color. If they wanted to see symbol, they would see symbol. So this is where customizing Unity's inspector using property drawers comes in. And I have one that I made. I'm not going to go over it, but it's in this project if you guys wanted to use it and look at it. I believe this particular one, I have to put this in here because it's in this namespace. I found online instead of writing myself. It's called show when. So we'll target. So the way this works, you specify another variable that's in the class somewhere. So target data. And if it's a Boolean, then you can just leave it like this. And if it's checked, it'll show up. But for something like enumeration, you can actually say, oh, if target data equals score, then show this, right? And we'll copy paste this. We'll do color and we will do symbol. All right, I'll save that, jump back over to here, and we should see those disappear. Ah, there we go. And we switch it to color. Boom, now we get color, symbol. So yeah, so like there's a lot of neat things like that I really like. I mean, something I love creating tools, so I like messing around with stuff like this. And yeah, so like I said before, this project is going to be available for you guys. So if you wanted to look at any of that stuff, like I said, I have that in that framework, scripts. And if you look in utility, I have a bunch of stuff in here. So I have a bunch of attributes that I made, some to make it so that fields are only editable when the game's running, some that hide them unless you're running the game, like just a lot of different like fun little things that you can mess with. And I have some other things here that do stuff. Okay, so as an example, if we look at the game manager, so I mentioned like the game events. So I wrap the game events. I started doing like a pattern where I make the game events wrapped in a serializable class. And I made it so I have this editor thing that actually can look at that class and it automatically fills in all the game events based on their name. So it's going to look at this onboard block click and it looks for a game event of that exact name and it'll fill it in for me. Which is really nice, because then as I'm coding all of this out, if I add a new game event to something and I forget to set it, then it'll automatically just fill it in as soon as you hit play. Now, of course, it's not the fastest thing because it uses reflection and does a bunch of other things like that, but it's a one-time thing, and it's only done in the editor, so it's not really like a big deal to have stuff like that running in the editor. Okay, so we made our game events. I was going to make another one, but I'm actually taking a little bit longer than I thought I was going to. So let's just jump into implementing it so the players can use them. So let's go back to our game. I will make another one. But we'll use the same script we already have. -1 score. Power up. So this will do a -1 to everyone else's score. All right. So we have our power up made, and we can always add more later if we wanted to. But let's implement the rest of this. So, okay, so each player can have a power up, and since we have this player data, we'll use this. So the idea is that when they click a block, they get a power up. The block will tell this player data, hey, you have this power up now. So let's do that. We will make a new property called game power up, and we'll see current power up. Oh, no. Current power up and gets private set. So we want this to be accessible by anybody, but only we can set it. And we're going to make some methods here. Public methods. We'll make one for public void. We'll call one called give power up, and we will have one for remove power up. Now the reason we're doing this is we're actually going to make game events trigger whenever we get or lose a power up, and the reason for that is for UI purposes. Whoops. We want the UI to be able to listen to that event and then update to reflect that. And it's just how I have everything else set up in the project, right? So like, we have to pass a power up here. So power up. Now current power up will equal that power up. That's all we're doing there. And remove power up, we're just going to set to null, right? Let's give it, like I mentioned, some game events. So, the game events, like I said, I have this pattern that I'm doing. So it's going to be a class. It's going to be serializable. You know, just even copy this one and throw it in here. Trigger game events. So game events is actually in a different namespace. Visual Studio, helpfully, will let me just click on that and throw it in there at the top, which is nice. But we'll have two. We'll have on player. Actually, no, let's just have one. On player power up changed. Let's just do that. So anytime it changes, it'll trigger this. And the way the game events are set up is they have a sender and then arguments that you can pass. So in this case, the sender is going to be the player, right? The player is going to be triggering it. And as an argument, we will pass in the power-up. If it's null, then we know, hey, they had their power-up removed. If it has one specified, then we know, oh, they had one added. So I could make it a single one, but I just think for the purpose of this, doing a single rather than like two for one and the other is just, will just work out just fine. So let's do that. You know what? I'm going to change this a little bit. Project assets, right? And then these are settings. Okay, so serialized field, private, trigger game events. We'll call that too. Okay. Now, when we after we get it or remove it, we will trigger that game events. So on player changed. So for a case like this, something where you know, users of like the designers, I should say, are setting something up like this, they might forget to set it. So an easy way to figure out like if I just did like dots raise, which is the method to call it, and then the sender was this, and for this we're giving a power up, so we want to pass current power up, right? But if this game event wasn't set, this would actually trigger an error. But let's prevent that by having a question mark here. So in Visual Studio, well, not in Visual, in C#, if you have a question mark, it's actually going to check to see if it's null. It's just shorthand, right? Instead of doing like the if null, we can just say like we can question mark. If it's not null, it'll do this. Nice and simple. So this other one, we'll do the same thing, but we'll pass null. All right, boom. I'm going to copy this name because generally the way that a game event is named here should be how it's named in the project. It's just the standard of this project. We'll go to events, right click, custom, make a new game event. And we'll call that. Oops. So for game events, there's like a lot of stuff in here that we can set. Like we can give everything description, so when we're looking at them, we know like what it does, right? I'm not gonna bother setting this stuff up. I'm actually gonna disable the validate arguments, but I will set this. I do have a parameter here for specifying what class should be calling this. and I will set that because otherwise the code is set up to like yell about it if it's not set. So okay, that is set up. So now we have the player. It can hold a power up and it can be given one. Next, what we need to do is we'll go to the game board. So the way this project is set up, we have our game manager and a game board. Game manager is like what you would expect. It does things specific to the game and just kind of manages things. And the game board manages, well, the game board, in this case, the tic-tac-toe board. We're going to have to, and the game board have logic to dish out these power-ups to specific blocks, right? So let's open the script because we're going to need it. We can close some of this stuff that we're not going to be using. We'll keep those. And each individual block has a script as well, which is this board block script. So the way the game board works, if you look at it, you can see there's like no blocks actually in here. It instantiates them during runtime. It has logic, so we can actually change the size of the board. I made it flexible, and I was going to make that a power up too, where we could make the board have a 4x4 or a 5x5 and do stuff like that. But I'm not going to do that just for time reasons. But so it's all set up to be very dynamic in that manner. So that actually points to a prefab of the board block here. Yeah, so this is what we're going to be changing here. Okay, so now this thing needs to be given a power up. So we'll make a new property here, public game power up. And I'll call it available power up. And you know what? I'll make this public. So since the game board manages these board blocks, I want it to be able to just set one if it wants to, right? We could like make a method and try to like do different things about it, but let's just make this simple as possible. So a board block, whenever it gets clicked, it triggers this method, trigger selection. What we're gonna do is if we have a power up, so if it's not null, we're going to give the player that power up. Give power up. There we go. It's that simple. And then I have another method here because I reuse blocks to reset this one. We're going to want to clear that back out whenever we are rebuilding our map. So I'll just do that there real fast. Okay. Now, we could do like a special animation as well, but for time reasons, I'm not gonna do that. I was originally gonna show you guys that, but let's just skip over that. Okay, so we don't have to change anything here, but we have to go to the game board. So the game board, so it needs a way to know all of the available power-ups, but right now it doesn't know which ones exist in the project. So since we already have this global game data, how about we just have another thing here, game power up, that just has all the power-ups and they're just available. So anything that points to the global game data has access to it, right? And we'll even make it so when we reset it, we will find them all. And this is that script again that's gonna like go through and grab everything of that type, which is in this case is a game power up. Something you might think is that like, oh, because all the other classes are derived from game power up, wouldn't it not find it? Because, you know, like basically is it like very specific to the type? And no, it will still find it. The way that this is set up, which I think is actually more of a Unity thing, because the way this works, it just asks Unity to find an offset of that type. And as long as it's derived from that, then Unity will still return it. So it'll find it just fine. Okay, let's go back to the project. And just to make sure that's working, we'll go to the global game data here. Power-ups is 0. If I reset this, there we go. Found it for us. So that's nice. Okay, so we have that. Now the board, game board, needs to have a reference to that. So serialized field, private. It's called global game data, So now we have a reference to this. We can look at the power-ups and assign it randomly to some blocks. So does anyone have any questions or anything? Is everything still good? Before I continue, we're getting pretty close to getting this working. But yeah, like I said, it's running a little bit longer than I was hoping it would. So I hope I'm not over explaining everything. All right. So let's go down here. So the way this game board works is I have a couple different things here, and I have context menu things for testing it, right? So the idea behind the board is that like you have a method here for resetting it. You have a method here for changing the board size, which happens like dynamically. So whatever's been clicked on, it'll be maintained. Yeah, there's a lot to go over. That's why like, yeah, there's, I don't want to spend too much time, yeah. Maybe in the future what we can do is like have something a bit more targeted, but like, yeah, I wasn't sure of where everyone would be at, knowledge wise. Okay, so we have a reset board, we have a thing that changes it dynamically, and we have two private methods that get called. This is actually more of a context menu specific thing. It's only meant to be called in the editor. But we just want to look at reset board, right? Because this is when like a new game occurs. This method gets called actually by the game manager to build a new board. So after we build out all of our blocks, we're going to assign some power-ups. Okay, so a few things here. Let's actually make some settings here. So I'm going to call these are our board settings. And we'll have another one down here for power-up settings. And serialized field, private int. We'll have two settings here for like a min and a max power-ups, right? So let's just say like every game you want there to be between like 1 or 2 power-ups, right? So min power-up counts, we'll say 1. So there's always at least 1, and we'll have a max, and we'll put that at 2. So yeah, we'll just randomly assign the power-ups we have, and it'll be between those numbers, hopefully. Okay, so after the board's completely done, we're going to assign power-ups to our blocks. So the blocks are actually stored in a multi-dimensional array. And that's just because, like, you know, you have an X and a Y for our boards, right? So, like, if I run the game, yeah, we have X and Y, and so all of this is just stored in an array. That way I know the exact position of every block. The blocks actually don't know where they're at because they don't need to know that, but the game board has all that stored. So we're going to pick randomly among those to assign our power-ups. First, we have to know what power-ups we have available. So actually, let's determine the power-ups we are going to assign. So the power-ups are all in our global game data. So if we go game data, whoops, I actually forgot to make the power-ups exposed. So let's do that. Let's make a property game power-up. We'll call it all power-ups. Get, and you can use this. I'll just do that because it's what Visual Studio apparently likes me to do. Yeah, so now this is exposed. So it should show up in our autocomplete all power-ups. Yes. Okay, so we're going to, let's see, let's make a, there's a few different ways we can do this. Let's make a list. We will do a list of game power-ups. So available power-ups that we're currently dishing out, right? And then we're going to pick a random number that's between our min and max, and fill this in based on that. But we also want to randomly pick the power-ups to do that with, so that this gets a little messy. So I'll call this all power-ups. So we're actually we'll make two lists, right? We'll have one list for all possible power-ups that we have. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because we don't want to put more than one. Actually, I guess we could put more than one of the same power up. That wouldn't be that big of a deal. You know what? Yeah, let's let that happen. That's not how I did it before, but it's fine if there's duplicates. So yeah, let's do it like this. We're gonna pick a number, int rand equals math f dot random. Oh no, sorry, it's actually random dot range, our min power up count and the max power up. Okay, so this is going to be how many power ups we're going to be dishing out. So if I actually continued like this, there'd be a bug in the code, and this is a gotcha with the random dot range. If you look at it, you can see that the lowest number, or the left number, is min inclusive, and this one over here is the max exclusive, meaning it's actually going to pick a number one less than the one this is. So if we have this set to 1 and this is 2, in this case it's always going to come up with a value of 1. So we actually need to add 1 to this. There we go. So that's caused me many headaches in the past trying to figure that out. But yeah, so that's a little gotcha there for this. So there, and then we'll just iterate to this. We'll say x equals 0, x is less than rand x plus plus, right? And we're gonna add a random power up to here. So add, and we'll do game data all power ups, and we'll pick. We're going to do random again. Random dot range 0, and then the power ups length. So this is actually a nice little thing with the random dot range thing. Since it's exclusive, you can just say length. You don't have to do -1 here, and it's going to work properly. Okay, so now that's all of our power ups that we're going to have available to dish out. Now we're going to go through each one. Our power ups. And let's assign them to a block. So one way of probably the best way of doing this would be to, again, have like a list of all of the blocks. And as soon as you give it a power up, remove it from that list and then keep going. That way, because the way I'm going to do it right here is I'm going to look at a block. I'm just going to pick a block at random and I'm going to give it a power up. Technically, I could get the same block multiple times. And if that happens, then that just means that power up it's going to get overridden. In this case, just because we're just doing like a little test thing here, I'm not going to care about that. I'll just let that happen. But there's a little bug there for you, for anyone who wants to try in here and like fix that, right? To always make sure it's properly setting power ups. But okay, so it's a multi-dimensional array. So random dot range again, 1 0, and we have to look at the block array, get length. There we go. Whoops, I have to do it like this. Yeah, random dot range 0, get length 1. All right, so we're getting it, and we have to set the power up. Available power up equals I guess power up. There we go. Done. And now that should be setting them. Let's see if that's working. So before I forget, I have to go, yep, global game data is set on the game board. That's good. Global game data has our power-ups. Okay, so let's hit play. Oh, it's maximized, but I don't want it to be. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to look at these blocks, and we're going to see if any of them got assigned. Oh, wait, no, we got an error. What happened here? we got a null reference exception. Doesn't the game board have the global game data? Doesn't like something I did here. We might have to debug that because I don't know what threw that error. That was initialized. It's not saying. I don't know. Does anyone see what the problem is? Wait, did I mess it up? Game data. Available power-ups. That has a thing. That has a thing. All power-ups. Yeah, all power-ups is defined because we're pointing to this, and it's always exists. You know what? Let's just do some debugging then. So I'm gonna turn on debug mode here, and we will drop. We're gonna do some live action debugging right here. Okay, let's attach to Unity. I'll drop breakpoint right there. Let's give it a go. Oh, you know what? I just saw it. I just saw the problem. Game data is not on our game board. I thought I was checking it, and oh, I was looking at the game manager. That's what I did. There we go. Yeah, game board didn't have a reference to that. That makes sense. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now normally we're all good. I can't actually look and see if it has a power up or not, right? Because if we remember, we made it a property, and properties aren't exposed normally in the inspector. But you can actually switch to debug mode right here in the inspector. You can drop down debug, and if we look at it, it will indeed expose. Yeah, it will indeed expose our property. So let's look through it. Boom, there we go. Look at that. One of our blocks has a power up. And there we go, 2 of them. So it actually assigned 2 power ups, which is nice because our code is probably working as intended. Now, something else we can try is let's figure out which of those blocks have the power up. Oops, go back to debug here. Which one? It was the bottom left. Bottom left has a power up, right? So if I click on this, now whatever active player, they should have a power up. So we'll click on that. And now if we look at the player data, again, it's not exposed, but if I go to debug, boom, look at that. Current power up. All of it's working. Now we just need a way in the interface to actually use that power up. Okay, so this will be pretty easy. So we'll go to the UI. I actually have, if we look in the scene, 2 things here that are both prefabs. Let's turn debug off of here. And they have a script on here called player panel. And the player panel handles like that animation that we have going on right now. When it's their turn, you know, it plays an animation, that way you know it's your turn. But let's add a new thing here. So right now we're listening to some game events. So yeah, when it's the player's turn, we know some things, and when the game ends, it's doing some things. But we're gonna listen to another game event now. We're gonna listen to that on player power up changed. So let's put that in here. So when a player gets a power up, so this player panel knows what player it's for. It's like pointed to it. So when this event triggers, we'll see if the sender matches up to the one that we care about. And if it is, then we know, hey, we need to change like what we're doing with this power up, right? So let's make a new region here. We'll just call it power up methods. And in here, we'll have a private void. Let's call it refresh power up display, whatever. Yeah. And we're going to have another method here. Well, you know what? Let's not do that one quite yet. First, so I'm not going to get too much into the game events, but game event listeners, I have like an interface here. So when the game event triggers, anything that this listener subscribes to, so all of these, we'll call this method. And the method goes through and it just checks to see which game event is triggering, and then it's going to do something, right? So we will check to see if the game event equals our listened event of one player power up changed. So the sender should be a player. So let's just check to see if it's our player. If sender, first of all, make sure it's not null, and then if it's also sender is player data, yes, and yeah, if player is that, yes, I love organized code. All right, Dan, see you later. And all right, so we know it's player, and the last thing we'll do is sender as player data equals our target, our player data. There we go. So if all that's true, we're gonna refresh our power up display. Boom. All right, so what is this gonna do? Well, let's have a button, right? We're gonna have a button here the player can just click. So I'll use Unity's default buttons. So we're gonna need to using Unity and editor UI. Nope, not editor. Whoops. I always do that. Engine. There we go. And scene references, serialized field, private button. There we go. Since we included that up above, we can do that. And we'll call this the power button. So buttons have a thing called interactable where you can just toggle them on and off, which we could use that, but instead I'm actually just gonna, you know what? No, let's use that actually. Yeah. We'll check to see if the player has a power up, and we'll toggle that based on that or not. So if player dot current power up doesn't equal null, do an else. So the power up button, whoops, power up button dot interactable. So if it's not null, that means we have one. So we'll make it true. And you know what we're gonna do also is, so the way that buttons are built, they have the actual button component, then they have a UI text component. So we will want to change the text to indicate what power up they have, right? So I'm using, for text, I'm using Text Mesh Pro, which used to be a separate, like, assets, but Unity bought them and blended them in. So, yeah, it's a little weird to use, honestly, because I feel like this should probably be a bit more integrated than what it is, but it's in the separate namespace, TM Pro. So, TM text. All right, so power up text. There we go. So we reference that. We're going to say the text equals, and we're going to look at the button with a power up and name. So with scriptable objects, you have, since they're assets, actually technically everything in every object, so every game object, every script and everything has a name. But in this case, the name of a scriptable object is going to be the name of the file itself. So we'll just use that to represent, like, you know, to show like that's the one you have. So we'll just name them properly. You could technically add another field to give it like a different name, like maybe a more proper label. But in this case, we'll just do this, right? So let's copy that. So if they don't have a power up, we'll disable the button, and we'll change the text to be, I guess, oh, no power up. Something like that, whatever. There we go. Okay, so that should be all set up and ready to go. Yes. Now let's go into here. Now, since these are prefabs and they're both copies of that, so if you don't know Unity, you can actually create like a game object and drag it into your project, and if you release, it will make it into what's called a prefab, which is like just a way of organizing things, right? So you can have like multiple instances of the same thing. You can even have nested prefabs. I'm not going to go into that, but I just wanted to mention that real fast. So by changing one of these, we'll change both of them. Okay, so we need to set up a button, right? Yeah, that's all we need to do. So let's make a button. We'll right click, UI, and button text mesh pro. So power up button. Whoops. Let's grab it and move that sucker down. Let's make everything bigger so we can fit this. Yeah, something like that. Power-ups could have big names, so we're going to leave a lot of space there for our button. We're going to make it bigger. Oh, it's default 30. Let's make it, yeah, 60. Double that. There we go. Let's change the default text here. I'll just say power up here. There we go. So yeah, depending on the power up, it might drift off in 2 lines. So the button's nice and big, just in case. You know what? Let's make it wider too. There we go. Okay, so we can save that prefab. I don't think we have to set anything else. Whoops. Oh yeah, one more thing. Right, since it's a button, the buttons use what's something called Unity events. So if we actually hit a plus here, so anytime this is clicked, it's going to trigger a Unity event here. So we can actually point to our player score object, look for the player panel, and we made a... No, we did not make a method. So we need to go to our code and make a method for our button to call. So public void, we'll call it, I don't know, activate power up, right? So all we're going to do is first, let's just make sure a power up exists. And then if it does, we'll just say, whoops, what did I do? Current power up dot, and I believe we called it execute. Yes, we will execute the power up. Now after that, after the player uses the power up, they're going to lose it, right? So then we'll call remove power up. And you know, instead of calling this activate power up, we'll call it use power up click. Usually I like, if a button's calling something, I usually like to put click in there. That way you know that's looking at the code, what's calling that. Because otherwise it might not be too clear. Okay, so, oops, I'll go back down here. Player panel and use power up click. There we go. And I think that's it, right? Oh, nope, we gotta set our game events. Let's do that. Power up changed. Don't want to leave that null. And with the specifier button and the text. Okay. Now I think we're good. Yeah. Let's just go back to our normal scene, and we should see in both cases our buttons there. Because I made it bigger, it actually pushed these up. So let's move these down a bit more. -125 seems good. Okay, so I can already tell you guys that I know there's a bug here, but let's play and let's see what's gonna happen. Let's maximize this. Oh, well, first of all, something I forgot to do. When this script starts, let's immediately refresh the power up display. Right, that way it's always up to date. So the power up here is the default text. If that changes, then we know that works. So let's hit play. Okay, so funny enough, we can see that the first player actually already has a power up, and the second player started, so that means there's a bug in there somewhere where it's not properly putting the correct player. But anyways, all right, so it's not player one's turn, but I can't click this button. So this can get a little messy. Debugging Unity UI, I feel like isn't the best. But we have multiple problems that are occurring here. So first of all, if I look at the prefab here, I'm using something called a canvas group and you can use that to change like the alpha, and that I was using that for animations, right? But it also has this box here for interactable, and that's unchecked. That's what's keeping the button from being able to be clicked. So there we go. I check it. Now you can see the button actually looks like it's enabled, which is proper. Well, I guess let's save that. So that's one bug fixed, and let's see if it works. All right. Okay, so player one's their turn, but we're clicking on this and it's not working. So what gives? And the reason for that is I actually have something that's blocking all of the UI here from being able to be clicked. It's this fade and cover here. It has recast target turned on. We have to turn that off. So there's a lot of stuff like that, like when you're stacking different things in the UI on top of each other. The blocks work because they're technically not UI, so I'm able to click those just fine. But because of the way I set up this UI, I introduced that bug, but now it should be fixed. So I just wanted to have that in there, just to show you guys to mention, like, be careful when you're doing your UI. You have to pay, especially when you have things that are interactable, you have to pay attention to your raycasts and your interactables, all that stuff, right? And now it should work. Okay. Oh, it's still not working. What's happening here? It might be this other thing. Shouldn't be the fade in. Let's display. That doesn't block anything. You might have to set these to block raycast, possibly. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, so I'm clicking it, it's not working. Let's just try disabling these. Now, it could always be that since it's the very last thing, it's on top, right? It shouldn't be. We don't have to raycast this. Don't worry that. Don't have to recast this. The background. Don't have to recast that. Doesn't matter. It's in the background. If I hit that. Oh, there we go. Yes, I think I had to turn blocks raycast turned on. Now we can click it. And there we go. So, it worked, right? We clicked on it. We got a power up, but it didn't clear this button. So the reason for that is if I actually look at the player, because it's probably triggering that game event. Well, I should say it's probably not triggering the the on player power up change. So let's put that in there. Now, whoops, after I go in here and make that blocks raycast, save that. Now I think we're good. Just have to keep clicking around until I get a power up. All right, player 2 got one. Boom, there we go. Works. See if there's another up. That player 1. So there should be, yeah, we're getting some more power ups. Clicking it, it's working. I'm not seeing the -1 yet. Let's go to the power ups here. It's configured properly, so there could be a problem with the code where it's not grabbing that one. Oh, there it is. Okay, we were just getting unlucky. There we go. I hit it. -1. It worked. All right. I mean, that's that's pretty much everything. It is 4:50 now, so I was hoping to maybe try to see if you guys could pitch some power up ideas and we can put it in there. But I think I took a bit longer. So instead, let's just move to questions. I guess, do you guys have any questions about anything? Do you want me to go into more detail? So I tried to, I hit a bunch of things here. The main things I wanted to get you guys thinking about is not necessarily how to do all these things, but rather approaching it with the mind frame of like empowering your designers. And that could even be you if you're a solo developer, right? You want to empower yourself to be able to do these things much easier. Yeah. Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, like I said, I think I probably went into detail for some things perhaps a little bit too long. So I do plan on putting this again online for you guys, so you can grab it and play around with it. Feel free to even steal the scripts I have here, if you want to use them, or take them and use them, like, do whatever you want, right? Do whatever you want to with it. Yeah. Hopefully I'll get that uploaded, relatively soon. I don't know when the video will be coming. I'll have to talk with the rest of the admins to see how we want to handle that, because we don't have like a YouTube, I don't think. But so I think maybe putting it on like Drive might be the way to go. All right, yeah. So yeah, it looks like you guys don't really have too many questions. So I'll just call it. I mean, we can still hang out for a bit, and you guys can unmute yourselves. We can all talk, whatever. Is there anything that anybody might want to see before I stop sharing? I think I'm starting to lose my voice.
Thanks for the tutorial, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. It looks like I technically got right on time.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, and as Mike's saying, we'll figure out the best way to get the video online.
Yeah.
One way or another.
It's going to be pretty big, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, I'll stop sharing my screen. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, hope you guys got something out of that, and yeah, I'd recommend if anyone's trying to learn Unity, right? Like, you could just grab this project and play around with it, maybe try to adding your own power-ups. But of course, it helps to know the project. But hopefully, I explained enough to where you could find yourself doing something like that. If not, you could always try doing something like this yourself, right? I'd always say anyone who's starting making games, like, make a small game first. Don't jump into something big. And I'd say the same would hold true for using a game engine, right? If you're just if you haven't done anything with Unity, start small. Just do like tic-tac-toe, like I had here, and it's a good way to learn lots of different things about it that you can then later use for bigger projects. Okay.
So I know Unity isn't open source. Has that ever been a problem for you? Like, have you ever wanted to change core functionality?
No, I never had an issue with that. I guess technically there were things that I ran into early on, like the first game we did, Wither Studios, I mean, the Crewman and Wolf Boy. That was way back before Unity implemented like their proper 2D stuff, and making a 2D game was a bit of a pain in the butt. But you could always get like a lot of assets and things like that kind of covered that stuff. I'd say modern Unity, like the current one, personally, as doing small projects, I don't know what you'd want to do that would require you to actually change the engine, because a lot of like the interface, as I showed, you can customize it pretty easily. They've been adding they even added like a whole UI toolkit thing that is great. You can just build a lot of, like, instead of what would have to be like a separate application, could now be in Unity itself. But no, I mean, personally, besides those early days, I haven't wanted to change a core thing with Unity for quite some time. Yeah, and that being said, like, I love the idea, of course, of open source. I actually been meaning to mess around with Godot myself, but I haven't had the time yet.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.